Okay, so today we're going to talk about some fixed assets. Little summary here. I'm Colleen McNally. I've been at SSG for about 8 years. I think I've probably worked with most of you. I have a background in accounting, and when it comes to the fixed asset module, that's my bucket. So what we're going to do today is the agenda is we're going to talk about some features and benefits of fixed assets. I'm going to show you some information that we can store for the fixed assets, some of the routines such as depreciation, projections that you can use for budgeting purposes. We're going to go over retirements, asset transfers. Also, I'm going to show you how it can integrate with the general ledger and purchasing, and show you some financial detail. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about actually implementing fixed assets and some of the steps that we're going to be taking. So a couple of the benefits of using fixed assets is, one, accurate and easy information. It's accessible. Everything's right at your fingertips. Current depreciation amounts, your net book value, remaining life of your assets, it's all going to be accessible in GP for you just by going either to the card or to some inquiry screens or running some reports for you. There are easy and reliable routines to help you manage your fixed assets. One of them is, oops, sorry about that. Give me a second here. All right, I kind of messed that part up there. There we go. Sorry about that. Easy and reliable routines to help you out. Some of these routines, like I had mentioned, are projections. You can use projections to forecast and budget your depreciation. Also, we have a routine to help you transfer assets either between locations or if you have multiple companies. One of the newer features in GP is you're able to transfer assets between companies. We can also retire assets and do a mass retirement of the assets. Integration with purchasing and general ledger modules, it's pretty straightforward. You can add assets from purchasing either through POs or through AP transactions. And the integration with the general ledger is pretty seamless. Once you run your depreciation, you can create GL journal entries back to the general ledger. Also, when you do any of the other routines such as adding assets, retiring assets, transferring, it'll automatically create a journal entry for you, not automatically, but it will create a journal entry for you that you're able to go ahead at that point and then post back to your general ledger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by going into fixed assets. In GP, fixed assets is found in the financial module. So over on the side is my navigation tabs, and I'm going to go to the financial module. I'm going to be using for this demonstration GP 2015 R2. There have been a lot of changes that have been made from GP 10, 2010, up to 2015, also 2013. 2013 R2 made a lot of changes to the fixed assets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize this area, and under cards, I'm going to start by showing you a general card. And I'm going to bring up an asset by using my lookup so that we can walk through some of the fields. You can see the lookups are just like anything else in GP. And I'm going to bring up this office desk. So the first thing you see on the general card is a class ID. Class IDs are a nice way to organize your assets. You can group them together by GL accounts, depreciation methods, type of assets. So if I use the link here to my class IDs, you can see the setup screen is pretty simple. I have a class ID of furniture. If I use my lookup, you can see in my demo I have autos, buildings, computer and computer equipment, furniture and fixtures, light trucks. So they're kind of how you're going to be classifying your assets. You'll also notice that one of the newer features is that you're able to default your class ID for your next asset. Real quick, I'm just going to check to make sure everybody, I see people are popping in, so give me 1 second just to make sure everybody can see. Hi, I'm just checking to make sure everybody can see and hear me okay?
Yeah, we can see and hear.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, so let's go back to our asset card. And we just went through the class setup. And you can see you can attach your account group to your class ID. You don't need to. Your account groups are going to be the GL accounts that will be hit when you go to make your GL posting. So you'd have your depreciation expense in here, your accumulated, your asset cost, and a clearing account that we're going to be talking about a little bit later on. Let me bring that card up again. So you have your description. You've got different types of assets. Account group we just went through. Again, if I highlight that, you can see where I've got different account groups. And again, those are going to be the accounts that are getting hit when you do your journal entries. You've got your acquisition date. Down here, you can store locations. A location ID is more or less like a city, and I can show you that. So that's more like a specific location if you're in different cities. And then you have physical location ID, which could be a building or a warehouse or another location. So off of your asset card, if I use my go-to, the second step again is we're going to look at the accounts. We'd attach our accounts to it. And I'm going to close that. And the third part of your asset is called a book. Now you can have multiple books for your assets. You can have you need to have one book, a company book, which could be your internal book, and that is the one when you run depreciation or you do anything in that book. That's the one that goes back to your general ledger, and that's the one you actually report on using your You use reporting your financials. I'm going to use my internal book. You can also have tax books. So you can have one asset and you can have multiple books. So you could have an internal book that you're going to maybe use like a straight line depreciation on. And then you can also have a tax book that you'd be able to calculate your depreciation on at maybe a different rate, maybe a double declining balance or something similar to that. And you'd be able to get reports on that for your accountants. So if you look here, you've got your placed in service date, you've got depreciated to date. Like I said, you've got your cost, you've got your year-to-date information down here, and you also have life-to-date information. You've got your depreciation method, and you've also got how your original life years along with how long the asset still has. So you can see from here we've got a lot of information. If I drill back on my year-to-date information, it'll show you the 2 months of depreciation that we've calculated. Again, I'm in Fabricam, which is Microsoft's test company, so I am in 2017. So you'd be able to see your current period's your current year depreciation. Also, if you drill back on life to date, if this was an older asset, you would also see all of your depreciation or your financial detail. What's nice is if you highlight one of these rows and you hit your amount, you can see what period the depreciation was for, your GL posting batch, when it was actually depreciated and posted, and the user who did the depreciation process or whatever routine you used there. Also off of your asset card, if I use my go-to, there's an insurance screen, and off of here, if you wanted to, you could always start to record some of your insurance replacement costs, anything like that. This isn't a mandatory screen, it's elective. You also have a screen if it was a lease, you could put your lease ID, the type of lease, payment, and the end date in here. And another one is the user data field. So you can see here we've got 15 fields, and we're able to come in and label each one of these. You can see I have a project number here. So if I wanted to include any other information that you might not be able to store off of the general card or off of your book, you could always use that user defined field. And again, those labels that I showed you are, we can label those so that they're a little bit more user friendly for you. One thing I did want to show you is off manufacturer name off of your asset card. You're able to also store serial numbers, model numbers, and warranty dates. And if you wanted to, you could, if it was a vehicle or another piece of equipment that needed any maintenance, you could also be storing over here your last maintenance dates, along with maybe tracking some year-to-date or life-to-date, life-to-date maintenance costs. So you can see there's a lot of information you can store on your asset card. Another thing what I want to show you next is going to be adding some assets. Like I had mentioned, there's a couple different ways to add assets, and I'm going to go down and show you a quick setup screen. I'm going to go down to my company setup screen, and again, like you could on your class ID, you can always auto-generate your asset IDs. But right through here is purchasing options. So you could mark these off, and you could post fixed assets through the payables module by entering an AP transaction. I'm going to demonstrate that for you. Also, if you're using purchase orders, you would also be able to, at the time you create that purchase order, either by an account number or by the receipt line, you could mark that specific line item as a capital item, which would be a fixed asset, and then it would bring in some information into fixed assets for you when you receive that. So off of that, they have what they call purchasing posting accounts, and I'm going to bring up one. So this is my account number that triggers anytime I use 1590 in an AP transaction. It's going to trigger that this transaction is going to be a fixed asset, and it'll bring some information over here for me. So let me demonstrate that for you. I'm going to go into our purchasing module, and the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can mark a PO and how you can transfer that over into fixed assets for you. So I've already got a PO set up, and it's going to be from Circuit Distributing West, and I've purchased a switching module. And if I highlight this row and I use this expansion arrow over here for my item detail, you can see that I've marked this item as a capital item. Okay, so that's the trigger point for POs because I'm doing it by receipt line. That's going to be the trigger for the PO to say, hey, this is going to be a fixed asset for me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through and I'm going to receive and invoice the PO items. And now I'm doing the invoice match part. Bear with me, I'm not really good at this part, but we'll make it work for us. So I'm just going to enter my vendor document ID, document number, and I'm going to go ahead and just post this. And again, before I do that, I will come in here and show you the capital item is marked. So this asset, once we post this, will show up in fixed assets for us. So I'm going to go through and post. I'm going to close this up. And of course, I'll get all the reports that we normally receive. So I'm just going to cancel through those. So now if I go back to fixed assets and I go to my cards, and I go down to general, you can now see that there's this purchase box here and there's also a purchase up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to enter a asset ID number. 26 is going to be my next number. I'm going to go through and do 26. Then up here I'm going to go to purchase. And you can see that this is the invoice that came in from our PO. I'm just going to mark that and hit select. And you can see that the description came in. The invoice date enters in along with the acquisition cost. Now if there's any other information I would like to fill in here, I could do that. But from here, I'm going to go, I've got to put my class in. So I'm going to go, and I'm just going to call that equipment. And you can see because of the way we have our classes set up with the associated account group, that my account group auto-populates. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go verify that they're the correct accounts that I wanted. Save that. And I'm going to go to my book. And from here, I'm going to pick my internal book. So by picking my internal book, you can see down here that my depreciation method, my convention, and my switchover are all defaulted in, along with my number of years of life. That is a setup screen that brings everything together. So I'm going to save this asset. And I'm going to close that up. And if we look down under our setup, that's what's called the book class. So I picked up my internal book, and for that specific item, I picked up equipment. Equipment. So you can see here where you can set these so that it'll populate for you. So you've got all your various types of depreciation. And you can also set in your years and anything else you need to put in here if you have a salvage value or anything like that. Any of those fields can be changed once you're bringing in that asset. So the other way of bringing in an asset using the purchasing module or the AP module is going through a transaction entry. So I'm just going to come in, and I already have a transaction entered, or I have a batch created, I should say. And I do have one transaction already entered. So this is going to be a 26 Honda Accord, my vendor. I put my dollar amount in just like you would with a regular AP transaction. I can go over to my distribution. And now if I wanted to have this filter into fixed assets or integrate in, I'm going to use that purchasing account that we had spoke about a few minutes ago. That's kind of like a trigger. So this is saying this is the clearing account for my dollar amount, and I'm going to hit OK. So I'm going to go and I'm going to post that batch. I'm going to go down to my batches, and I'm going to go to my fixed asset batch, and I'm going to post this. And again, we'd get all our normal reports that we would from GP. And again, when we go back to financial, general, you can see our purchases here again. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to enter my asset ID, go to the transaction, and you can see that this information came in. I just have to attach my class to it, and the account group will show up. What's nice too is when you use either the PO or the AP area, off of your acquisition cost, if you use this expansion arrow, if I open that up, you can see that along with the description here, I also have my vendor ID, I have the document number, and the dollar amount of that transaction. So it's a nice way to be able to track exactly where this came from. And of course, just like anything else, if we drill back on it, you would have access to the to see the voucher with the drill back. And that would have been the same feature with the PO one that we showed you earlier. So we're going to go through the same steps again. I'm going to just verify my accounts. Oops, I didn't save it. There we go. So now that I saved it, you can see that this account group ID actually gets blanked out. But when you go to your accounts, they are populated, and you can see that they are my vehicle accounts. And down here is my clearing account. So what's going to happen is when we did the PO or the AP transaction, GP goes through and it debits this clearing account as it would for your purchase, and it's going to credit your AP account. When you're bringing it into fixed assets, we're going to go through and do a GL posting routine in a minute. You're going to see where fixed assets will now debit my asset cost account to put the dollar value into my cost account on my balance sheet, and it'll credit out the clearing account to wipe out the clearing account. So it's a nice way to make sure you've got everything clearing for the current month. And if I go to my book, I'm going to bring in my internal book, and you can see my information filters in. Save that. Now, if I wanted to also add this to another book, all you would have to do would be to pick up the other book, and let's say I wanted to add it to a federal book. I could pick up a federal book, and now you can see where my depreciation methods changed from straight line to 200% double declining balance. So when you run depreciation, you could run it on both books, get $2 amounts, but only your internal book will go back to your financial statements or your financial ledger. So those are two ways that fixed assets integrates along with the other modules in GP. Now, if you're not going to do that and you want to enter an asset manually and keep it separate from AP, the steps are very similar. We would come in, we would pick up a class, and you could see when I'm doing it this way that my asset ID auto-populates. And I'm going to buy myself a new laptop. I'm going to Dell laptop. And again, once I pick my class, my account group comes in. I'm going to say my acquisition date was 04/01/17, and it was $1,200. And I'll come in and give it a location. And if I had employees in here also, I would be able to come in, if you're using payroll or HR and you had folks listed, you would be able to come in and assign a user or an employee to that asset so you know where it's at. So from there, I save it. And you can see the steps are just the same. We've got our accounts in there. Save that. And we can go to our book, and we can create our internal book and save that. So now we have 3 new assets that we've added to GP. One through purchase orders using the capital item checkbox on the receipt on the lines. We've used an AP transaction using the clearing account or the purchase account. And we've also added one manually. So next I'm going to go over a couple of routines. The first routine I'm going to go through, let me go down to my routines, is going to be what's called a projection. depreciation projections, they're going to calculate depreciation without updating any of your fixed assets or any financial details. They're, like I said earlier, they're useful, especially if you're going to be doing budgeting. So I'm going to come through and I'm going to project all assets. You can create groups. So if you have a lot of assets or a big team and maybe some members work on specific types of assets, you can also create asset groups and certain folks can work on just those groups. So I'm going to put a projection in here. I'm going to go out to 12/31/17, and because I'm going to use financial information, I just want to do a projection on my internal book, because that's the one that's going to be affecting my financials. So I move my book over and I just hit projection, and this will take a minute. You'll see the bar go, and then you'll see projection become active again. Now you don't get a report right from here. You have to go down into reports, fixed assets, and projection. And I'm going to pick up let's do a period detail. I'm going to hit new, and I'll call this 2017. I'm going to pick my book, and I'm going to go from put my dates in there. Now I did this for all my assets. So I'm going to go ahead and print this out. And you can see that what you're going to end up with would be a report. It's not a simple report, but it'll give you your asset ID along with each period in the month of in the depreciation dollar amount. So from here, you'd be able to scroll down to the bottom and get what you project your remaining depreciation for that year would be. So those are projections, and I'm going to discard my changes here. Another routine that is done all the time would be your depreciation. Oops, that's reports. Let's go back to routines. So I'm going to go down to depreciate. And you can depreciate groups of assets. You can depreciate all your assets at once. Or you can see here you can also depreciate one asset at a time. So I want to depreciate all my assets. And I'm going to run my depreciation as of 3/31/2017. And if I wanted to do all my books, I could do all. So let's keep everything intact here. I'm going to select all my books. If you just had one, you would just do your internal. And I'm going to go ahead and run depreciation. So my depreciation has been run. And how we can view what has been depreciated is if we go back to cards in our book, and let's bring up one of our assets. Let's go down to the bottom here. So here are the three that we just added. Let's look at the one before that. And I'm going to bring in my internal. So now you can see that we depreciated up to 3/31. And if I go to my year-to-date information, oh, this was a new asset. You can see that I don't have a batch number. Let me pick a different asset so you can see a little bit of a difference here. Here we go. So now if I go to my year-to-date depreciation, you can see where I've depreciated for January and February. And these have been, you can tell that these have been filtered or integrated back to your general ledger because they have a batch number. So right now, this information that we just ran, the depreciation we ran, is still only in the fixed asset module. It hasn't gone back yet to the financial module. Once it does, we would have a batch number here. But you still have the drill back to see when it was run and who ran it. And once we get down to one of our next routines, our GL integration, I'll show you how we're going to get that back into the GL. So for routines, we've talked about projections, and we've talked about depreciation. Also, I'm going to minimize this part here. We can also retire assets. So you could come through and you could pick an asset. And I'm going to come down to the bottom here, and let's retire this fancy automobile. It has a retirement date, so let's stick with the same month that we're working in. Oops. Retirement. Now these are canned retirement types, so I'm just going to say other. And if you wanted to, you could also set up retirement codes. Donated, exchanged, lost, sold. Let's say we donated this fancy automobile. So I'm going to put in 100% of it. And that's all you really have to do. If you were recording any sale or loss on this asset, you would be able to put in those dollar amounts, and they would go into the journal entry that we're going to be making. So I'm just going to hit retire and say yes. And retirement is completed. So that's how easy it is to do a retirement. They also have mass retirements. Again, you would create an asset group, and you would put all your assets that you would want to retire into that one group, and you'd be able to retire them all at once. Also, what they have is a transfer. So you could come in and you could transfer an asset between locations. So let's just pick up this PC, and we'd have a transfer date. And I'm going to transfer 1, and you could see here from location, and then down here you would put in, oops, not 11, you would put in where we're going to be transferring it to, and that would automatically transfer that asset. You can also do an intercompany transfer if you have multiple databases or companies, so that you could transfer it from company to company. Again, what that's going to do is actually retire it from the current company, and it would add your asset to the new company for you. So let's go, and before we go any further, let's take a look at how this is going to interface with our general ledger. So under routines, you can see that we have a GL posting. And this is a nice screen. They've really made a lot of nice enhancements to this with 2013 R2 and 2015. What you're able to do in here is I'm going to change my posting date to the end of the month. And I'll just print this to the screen so you can see the report. So we get a page for each account number, but you're going to see that it gives us our transaction code, gives us the account and the dollar amount. And if I filter down, you can see that we've got the other account there too. So next what I want to do is I want to keep my journal entry separate. So I want to go through now and I want to make a journal entry for my depreciation. So I'm going to pick up my source document again, and I'm going to go FADEP, insert, and up here I'm going to make an entry. Let's call this March depreciation. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to process. So now you see all the detail for all the assets and the depreciation amount. It's not going to post this way back into my general ledger because I'm going to post by summary. You do have the option to post in detail. I'm not sure if you'd really want to do that, depending on how many assets you'd have. You'd have a huge journal entry. But what the summary is going to do, and I'm going to take you back into the GL and show you that, is it'll summarize it for us. Now, if you notice this and something's wrong here, you can always delete this and go back and make any necessary corrections during the month that you need to before you actually post this to your GL. But I'm thinking everything looks pretty good here, so I'm going to go ahead and post. And I'm not going to worry about my journal entry, posting journal. Oops. All right. And you can see here that you don't have the option of changing the book. It's only your company book that it's going to make the journal entry for. So now, if we go into transactions and under financial, I'm going to go to my batches. I'm going to use my lookup. You can see that I've got 2 fixed asset batches here. Number 3, if we go back in and we look at that, you can see that those are our additions, and it's hitting our clearing account. And if I go to our next journal entry, you can see how it's summarized our depreciation now. So from here, you would be able to come in and just post those 2 batches to your general ledger. And of course, you know what the posting journal looks like, but we can print that out anyway for you. See, I've got an invalid source document. I got to get that fixed. So that's how it would integrate with your general ledger. Also from there, if we go back, excuse me, there are some reports. I want to go into inquiries and reports. I'm going to show you a few things. Inquiries, the financial detail. This is very similar to the information you saw on your book. So if we go down and we look at one of our assets and we pick up our books, you can see that everything has been, our batch numbers are there, so you know that that's been interfaced back into into the GL for you. There's also your retirement screen. So if you wanted to look at one of the assets that retired, and I think it was that fancy automobile, you can see that that was retired. And if we drill back on the event, it'll give you the date of the retirement. There are also some reports that you can get from fixed assets under activity. One is your annual activity report, and I'll print that and show that to you. I'm going to call this 2617. And again, you can get it on any book that you want. I'm going to stick with my internal book. And of course, you have options on assets, type of assets that you want. I'm going to print out everything for us. And this is a report that we would want to run before year end. And for this report, I'm just going to minimize this a little bit. Hopefully it's okay for you guys. you can see that you have your asset number, you've got your quantity, so you've beginning year, and then throughout the year you've got the activity that happened. So you can see here 3570 is what we've done for depreciation so far this year, and you can see your new net book value. So there are a couple different reports. There's also if I get out of activity and go to depreciation, they have depreciation ledger, depreciation by class, depreciation. I wanted to get the expense to general ledger. And of course, you need to have your option up here. And options to include active, retired, or partially open. Again, you can go by asset ID. And if we bring this up, it's a nice way to tie back to your GL. It'll show you the account number and all the activity for that period or that year that you're currently running the asset on. So this should tie back to your general ledger. There's also some nice historical reports that you're able to get now in fixed assets that we weren't able to get before, and I believe ledger by class ID is one of them. So you could see here we have depreciation as of, and you could get current amounts, or you could go back into a point in time. So historical reports are also out there for you. Now, when I showed you the activity report, I had mentioned something about year-end, and there is a year-end routine. And again, that's under routines. And if I go into my year-end, you would pick your books that you wanted to, and you would just slide them over and close your year. What that's going to do is allow you to run depreciation for the next year. So you have to close your year before you run depreciation for the following year. And it will also wipe out your year-to-date depreciation on your book or any of your inquiry and move everything into just life-to-date depreciation for you. Let's see, smart lists. There are some smart lists out here. And let me just open this up a little bit. So we have a fixed asset module, and you've got your regular fixed assets. So you can get a listing of your assets. And just like with anything else, you've got some options with adding columns and bringing some information in. Also, you have one with your books. So you'd get all your book information and your net book value. And again, whatever other columns you might need. You could bring in account numbers, depreciation rate, date added. So there are some nice reporting features along with that. So next is let's talk a few seconds about actually doing implementation. We would be able to bring in your assets. What we would want you to do is clean up anything that you have outstanding or maybe that you think you're not going to bring into GP. We'd want just, fresh start. We would help you build a spreadsheet, and it would be based off of, if we look at the card, we would go through and we would take a look at the fields that you want to actually track. Of course, we need the required fields, class ID, asset descriptions, an account group, your acquisition date and cost. But what's nice is when we get back into the book, I'm just going to bring up a book here. What we would be able to do, depending on when you bring in the assets in, we would be able to bring in your year-to-date depreciation along with the life-to-date depreciation. And we'd have a nice cut over from, let's say, June 1st, we could start running depreciation in GP, and it would probably be a few pennies off, but you would be able to continue depreciating it. You don't have to start over running depreciation for the asset from the beginning of time or wait to get new assets. So we use what is called a macro that would actually do the data entry for you if you have a lot of assets. So that's something that we can talk about if you're interested. Is there anything? I'm going to open up the floor in a second to see if there's any questions. Oops, not video connection. Let's do audio connection. And does anybody have any questions on fixed assets? I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Any questions out there?
Colleen, I have one. This is Jean Brown.
Hi, Jean.
And maybe it's more complicated than or maybe it's easier than I'm thinking. But when you're going through the purchasing, the purchase order, many times the actual invoice is different than the purchase order. So before I put it into my subledger, I'm usually making some journal entries or adjustments. But I didn't see where there was an opportunity to adjust the cost based on the actual once the merchandise was received.
So you're talking after it's already been entered into the fixed asset module?
Before I entered into my fixed asset, because we're talking about streamlining and importing through PO, saying, okay, I've got my invoice in. The purchase order was $20,000. The actual cost, is $17,000. And I only want to put in the $17,000 into the fixed asset module. Is there an opportunity to adjust that down?
Yes. Yep. Anytime you bring in, once we're on that fixed asset general screen, you can adjust your costs there. And
okay.
Yep, and even after the fact, after an asset has been saved, even after it's been depreciated, there are certain fields you can go into and make changes to. One of them can be your cost. You can change your, let's say somebody accidentally set it up as a 7-year asset and it was only supposed to be a 5-year asset. We can go in and make those changes. And what GP does is allow you to recalculate your depreciation. So there's a couple different methods on doing that. But yes, you can definitely go in and make any changes you needed to. Okay.
And how do you quickly search for an asset? I know with the current system I'm using, I have lots and lots of assets. And usually I can do a sort. I guess it's a smart list thing I could set up. Now that
you could do a smart list. Also, if you already don't have asset IDs, depending how you use a numbering convention, you can also narrow it down that way. Some folks use like part of their class ID as the beginning of like a prefix to their asset ID number. Or another thing is, it's all probably in your numbering how easy you want it to be. I mean, some folks start with, each year they start 2016-0001, 2016-002. So you could look that way, and also off of the window, it's just like any other search window. You should be able to type in and search easily for it, or using a smart list too.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All right. Well, if you guys think of anything in the meantime, actual questions on fixed assets or any concerns that you might have, if you want to move forward with that, and before you actually dive into it, please email me at Colleen@softcellgroup.com. And if you are interested in getting fixed assets implemented, or if you have any questions on your licensing, that's Amy's cup of tea. So you could email Amy at amy@softsolgrp.com. And if nobody has any other questions, sorry for the few technical glitches there earlier, but thanks for your time. And let us know if there's anything else we can do for you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Colleen.
You're welcome. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.